in this container, just mentioned briefly the reservoir and the base, and the next step is how you build up a subfloor. So if you imagine the water levels around about here, you need something to support the planting media above that, so that sits onto that wicking kind of surface. So the way this is achieved in these containers, there's a few little bits and pieces in there as I wanted to show as well. So here there's an aluminium drinks can, and these are 330mm Coke cans or beer cans, and what I've done with these is I've just used a pair of scissors just to punch four sort of slots around the top, just to allow water to permeate through and allow the air to come out as well. So these sit into the bottom of the container, and you need about 10 or 11 of those, and then that makes a nice support for the planting media. If you imagine, once you've got all those cans in there, they're not going to fit together completely. There's going to be some spaces between these. So what I'll do next, this is Mark Paine's idea, he just takes old packaging, corrugated cardboard, rolls that up into little cylinders, and then where the container is here, is the one where you've got a gap. You just take that and you poke it down between the two, so you're going to be able to see. So if you imagine that solid can, so you've got 10 cans, and then there's all these little corners, all these little triangular spaces, it's got this rolled up corrugated cardboard in there as well. So one thing, what that does is cardboard soaks up the moisture and it also wicks. But another element of these containers which is quite clever is, as well as using compost, it's possible to use vermicomposting in here as well. And I've tried to develop this a little bit, and what I've found is, if you use growing sort of raised beds and traditional gardening methods, and you might want to use things like trench composting or composting in situ. The problem with that is, once you've got an established bed and it's planted, you don't want to start digging up, and you don't want to start allocating areas where you've got kind of half composted buried material. You don't want to be disturbing that, you don't want to be digging it up, you don't want to be drawing attention to it, because then you might get vermin, and rats can kind of get smells and things like that. So I find it's quite a waste of space, because you're sort of thinking, oh, I know it's over there somewhere, but I don't want to go anywhere near it because I might dig it up again. And then if that takes a month to rot down, then you've got another month's worth of material. What do you do with that? Do you have another space? You end up using more and more space to take this material. With a very small container like this, it's possible to use what's called a compost roll. And you want to check out Eve Growing, because there's a lot more information about that. But basically what it is, it's kitchen scraps that have been sort of shredded up in a waste disposal, or you can kind of chop them up very small, and then you almost kind of gift wrap it in newspaper. So it's a bit like you go to the fish and chip shop, you get your chips, they wrap it all up and make a little bundle with the newspaper around it, or the newsprint rather than newspaper. And then rather than eating chips, you take this compost roll and then you poke it into the soil and you bury it out of compost. And then you set maybe half a dozen mature worms, tiger worms or kind of red wigglers, composting worms rather than earthworms, rather than lob worms, and then they'll start initially eating the cardboard around the edge, and then they'll work inside into the kitchen scraps as they're breaking down, and they'll eat those. But then they'll be moving around, so they're actually feeding the plants, feeding the soil at the same time as composting that material. Well, obviously with something like this, you might have a couple of tomato plants in it, or a tomato plant, a chilli plant, or some basil or mint or whatever you've got growing. Cucumbers I did quite well. So what I thought I'd do, it's basically a worm towel within the container. So I've got some galvanised wire. So this is 10mm galvanised world wire mesh. You just buy it in DIY stores, it's quite cheap. It comes in about sort of 4 foot by 2 foot sheets, and you can cut it down with probably scissors. If you've got an old pair of scissors you're not too worried about, or tin snips, and these are sheet metal working tin snips. So I wrap it around a bit of old downpipe, and then when you cut it, make sure you leave these pieces sticking out, and then you can bend those in and twist it round on itself using a pair of pliers. just to make a nice join. So it looks a little bit like a kind of bird feeder or something like that. And then what I do is I take some cardboard, wrap the cardboard around here, and then once you've got your container with your subfloor installed, then this container sits on the surface like that. And this one I've just put a bit of masking tape just to hold it around, just so it's easier to move about. And the idea behind this is once you've got your compost around here, the corrugated cardboard will retain the compost, and then as this compost compacts and the roots start growing around, that hold like a core, like a cylindrical sort of shape that you'll be able to put the compost rolls into, and as they compost down, that volume will reduce, and then you might want to later in the season put another little compost roll in there, a bit of compost on top. So it's feeding the plant, and I think during the growing season a couple of those quite a good bit of additional feed as well. I'd probably use a sort of organic seaweed extract or worm tea as well, so I'm supplementing the plant's growth, but it's nice to have a little bit of, especially in containers, obviously plants using up a lot of nutrients and a lot of elements from the soil, and it's quite nice to have compost in situ. What I've found as well, the level of these things will reduce, and it's a good idea just to kind of mulch as well. But what I'm not too sure about is in terms of using these containers. If you're growing a large tomato plant or something that's going to have a big root ball, that's going to take up a lot of nutrition from the soil. So I'd probably pull those plants up and then take some of the compost out, and depending on how much time I've got, I might take the cans out, or probably I'd just leave those in, because once you've got roots going down there, they're going to be doing the same thing as the cardboard. They're going to be also breaking down and feeding the plants again. When it comes to growing in beds and just in soil, a lot of people, they'll pull plants out, but in a way I think it's quite nice if you can just cut the plants off. You've got that root structure that's already wicking up moisture, so in terms of feeding soil, it's got a lot of soil structure already, so it's good to kind of leave root balls in, and then they'll rot down in place. It's a bit like if